Hello, everybody. Um, there we go. Just my notes. Thanks for this last day on a fantastic conference. I think the spirit of the real life conferences has survived in this Zoom universe somehow, and the engagement and the lectures have been fantastic. I don't think there was one boring lecture as far as I joined. I think everything was super interesting and contrasting and thoughtful. Harold Nelson, I have known since maybe 2011. I connected with him on the PhD list, him and Peter Jones, searching for people who were like-minded. This is the email list for PhD in design. And Harold immediately connected us to a group of people like Alex Ryan and others. And this was how we started to make the snowball running. Harold Nelson is he's almost like a mentor to me. I think it's been really interesting to know him, and I really appreciated his contributions to our society. Harold used to tell about the Berkeley Bubble, which is a bubble of systems thinkers that came together when he was a student there. And amongst those people, I tried to learn more from him about what the Berkeley Bubble really was. I still have a vague idea, but at least some people like C. West Churchman, Werner Ulrich, Bela Banathy, Kenneth Boulding, Russ Acuff, and in architecture and design, Horst Rittel and Christopher Alexander seem to make out this fantastic moment of his life and where this interest in systems comes from. So Harold is a long-time friend of NID and late MP Ranjan, especially. We talk about Ranjan frequently, and he's dearly missed. And I think many of us agree that this was a great figure in our community. So Harold is somehow back in NID, and it's a known area, a known place for him. Harold Nelson is a visiting scholar in the School of Computer Science at the University of Montana. He's the owner of Harold G. Nelson, LLC, a professional design education consultancy. As a consultant, Dr. Nelson has worked with a variety of organizations, including nonprofits and corporations, state and federal agencies, military organizations, international government, and the United Nations. He works as an educator, designer, and researcher in the field of organizational systems design and systemic design practice, where he brings both design expertise and systems thinking to the study of organizational design and innovation. He received his Master of Architecture degree from UC Berkeley and the Bachelor of Architecture from Montana State University. He received his PhD, graduating with distinction from the University of California at Berkeley. And he told me he basically designed his own PhD program, and it was given a great degree of leeway to do that, to make this into a special study. He was the Nuremberg Distinguished Professor of Design in the School of Design at Carnegie Mellon University from 2009 to 2010. And for 12 years, Dr. Nelson was the designer and director of the graduate programs in whole systems design at Antioch University, which was named among the top 10 organizational development programs by US News and World Report. He has been a senior lecturer in the Graduate School of Business and Public Policy and School of Defense Analysis at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And one important thing is that he is the past president and trustee of the International Society for Systems Science. And he is among a long range of very high profile former presidents. In 2004, this book, which many of you probably know, The Design Way, Intentional Change in an Unpredictable World, Foundations and Fundamentals of Design Competence. This is a book co-authored with Dr. Eric Stolterman. It received the Outstanding Book of the Year award from the Division of Instructional Development of the Association for Educational Communications and Technology. MIT Press published the second edition in 2012. It is a great pleasure to have you here, Harold, and let's give him all a warm welcome. The microphone is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Werner. It's good to see you again, and it's good to be back in India again, even if it's only virtual. I'm still learning about virtual meetings and that sort of thing, so I'm kind of new. However, I did bring my mask just in case. I'm supposed to use it at any time. And my wife made me get out of my pajamas and put a shirt on, so there's always the downside of these Zoom meetings. And I do still miss Ranjan. We have an unfinished project. So what I would like to do now is, and I'm very good with technology, so just hang on while I try to play my slideshow. So is it possible that everybody sees this?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm everybody, I can see it.
All right. Thank you. It's another part of this strange virtual world as I'm looking at my computer screen pretending like it's a person. It sounds strange, but that's what you got to do. So I was invited to give a keynote at this marvelous symposium whose theme was on the well-being of humans and human to humane. So as a designer, the first thing I did was I turned it into some design projects. And that's what I wanted to present or share with you is these 3 projects. The first project, of course, is the design of the presentation itself. The second project is the design of an inquiring system for design. And the third project is a schema design. The last 2 design projects are sort of, this was a refinement of those designs a bit, pushing them a little further. But anyway, starting the design of the presentation, I was sort of inspired. People are sharing nowadays a lot of aphorisms. It's like comfort food for the mind. So one of my favorite that I thought I would like to see what it would play out like in reality is one by Albert Einstein. And he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And we do seem to have a number of problems nowadays. So anyway, what I took away from what he was saying that I would try to make a kind of a practical application with is to actually think different. What does it look like to actually think different? Not think about something different, but think differently about what we're doing. And that's what I'm going to try to share with you. And for transparency purposes, full disclosure, I am design-centric, and my understanding or appreciation of design, I know there's a lot of definitions of what design is. My appreciation of what it is that design is a conjunction of poiesis and phronesis. And those are kind of big words, but maybe just different words. Anyway, they're very good words for design for my purposes. And poiesis is the activity in which a person brings something into being that did not exist before. It means
Harold?
to make. Yeah.
Have you tried to change the slide? We're still seeing the first slide here.
Yeah, it's still first slide.
Okay, that's intentional.
Yeah. Sorry.
People were asking and making a fuss in the chat. I'm sorry.
This is just my introduction.
Apologies.
Forewarned is fair warned, as they say. So anyway, my approach to design, when you hear me use design, it's a conjunction of making and phronesis, which is wise action. It's a type of like a practical virtue in the way that it's explained by the ancient Greeks. And systemics are the logics of design. So given that, just keep that in mind when I'm using the term design. That's what I'm meaning. And so we will begin the presentation now.
This is the story of how one species changed a planet. The latest chapter of our story begins in England 250 years ago. Fueled by coal, then oil, several brilliant inventions appeared. They ignited the Industrial Revolution, which spread like wildfire through Europe, North America, Japan, then elsewhere. The great railways, then cars and highways, connected people across the globe. Medical discoveries saved millions of lives. New artificial fertilizers meant we could feed more people. Population rose rapidly. But this was nothing compared with what was to come. The 1950s marked the beginning of the Great Acceleration. Globalization, marketing, tourism, and huge investments helped fuel enormous growth. People swarmed to cities, which became even more powerful engines of creativity. In a single lifetime, the well-being of millions has improved beyond measure. Health, wealth, security, longevity. Never have so many had so much. Yet 1 billion are malnourished. In a single lifetime, we have grown into a phenomenal global force. We move more sediment and rock annually than all natural processes, such as erosion and rivers. We manage 3/4 of all land outside the ice sheets. Greenhouse gas levels this high have not been seen for over 1 million years. Temperatures are increasing. We have made a hole in the ozone layer. We are losing biodiversity. Many of the world's deltas are sinking due to damming, mining, and other causes. Sea level is rising. Ocean acidification is a real threat. We are altering Earth's natural cycles. We have entered the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch dominated by humanity. This relentless pressure on our planet risks unprecedented destabilization. But our creativity, energy, and industry offer hope. We have shaped our past. We are shaping our present. We can shape our future. You and I are part of this story. We are the first generation to realize this new responsibility. As the population grows to 9 billion, we must find a safe operating space for humanity, for the sake of future generations. Welcome to the Anthropocene.
So we can see that the Anthropocene is our new reality. It's our context. And that dramatic changes have happened and they're still happening. And now we have additional stressors causing some pain. We have pandemics, global warming, environmental degradation, terrorism, balkanization of societies, the rise of autocrats, where we have no shortage of things that are stressing us. So there's just a general sense of dis-ease amongst the populations of the world, that there's a loss of well-being. So the design question, the big design question, is how is it possible to secure desirable changes rather than just to adapt and survive the changes that we get by chance or happenstance? So again, there are many definitions of well-being, and the one that I'm using for this particular presentation amongst the many is that well-being is an emergent quality. And it's an emergent quality that comes from a whole, healthy, interconnected life. So the design question further refined is, how is it possible to reestablish a sense of well-being through what I call deep designing? So that's the design question I had posed to myself. And what I'm going to do now is introduce you to the second design project, which was the design of a design conversation. This is design inquiry versus other kinds of inquiry that people may engage in. It's different in that it's a search inquiry, it's not research. Again, the theme is to try to think differently. So this is a search inquiry, and this is the approach is a designer, what I consider a designerly conversation that you would have. And it's important that the designers sort of are staying in the moment. This is not a map for what future tracks to take, but the appreciation is that as you are in this conversation and you're doing this search for or towards an indeterminate outcome, there are emergent understandings, emergent milestones, emergent directions, but they're not predetermined. They're ones that emerge as we're going along. So that is one of the things that makes this form of inquiry distinct. And this could be a whole paper or chapter or book on its own. So it's just going to be a brief introduction. And the point is that this is kind of a quantum inquiry in that you start at an inception point with the design question, whatever you're interested in, and then you start working forward using or discovering connections, conjunctions, and markers along the way that help you sort of navigate towards an outcome that you're not sure what the outcome is. It's indeterminate, but it's an outcome that you're seeking out or searching for. So in this case, the inception point was desiderata of well-being. What is it? How is it possible to obtain a sense of well-being? And in addition to that is a question about the sort of instrumental ability to access or gain well-being intentionally. So this is, in this case, looking at deep designing. Is that a possibility? Is that a good possibility? So successfully gaining well-being depends on the strategies of action that we take. And so in this case, the search is navigating into a desired future rather than backing away from a situation in the present that we find we do not like, that we want to get away from. So in this case, the strategies that came up was one of proactive and one of reactive approach. This is the first sort of fork in the road we're going to take. The proactive one is when we're pulled into the future by attractors, and the second one is the reactive one is you're pushed into the future by issues, by problems. So in this case, we're going to take the proactive path, and look at it more closely. So in the proactive path, there are two, possible branches that appear. One is on stances towards design. One is on approaches to design. We're going to choose to look, or I chose to look at approaches in this case. However, I don't want to dismiss stances too quickly, because they're very important in designing. That's where we look at our sort of internal approaches, our internal understandings, our mindedness, our mindfulness. Too often stances are considered to be just our biases, things that we need to be careful of and sort of remove ourselves from. But in this case, it's absolutely essential to appreciate and understand the stances that we take in design. But that's internal focus primarily, and I want to look at the external approach to design inquiry. So the approaches to design inquiry that I wanted to look at are three different kinds, and I'm going to only in this case, again, only look at one, but I wanted to introduce the three, and that's the extant approaches, the ones that are still existing in operation, used literally every day. Nascent approaches that are just the ones that are beginning and just sort of coming forth now, taking form, and incipient approaches that are the ones that are developing. They're just sort of signaling that they have this presence and they may be of interest. And of course, that's the one, the path that I want to take for this particular presentation. But I wanted to be sure and look quickly at the other two, the extant inquiries, which form design identities, design cultures, design ecosystems that we find nowadays. So you'll see that there are schools for each one of these that we can find. We can find professional organizations. We can find positions in organizations that are defined in each one of these types of categories. And they've been quite successful. Some of them have been around for literally centuries, and some are just sort of taking a firm foothold now. I think that in this symposium, several of these have shown in a good way the kind of work that they do, the kind of interests that they have. So in the next one, I wanted to just touch on nascent designing, the systemic design approach. And this is kind of the foundational branch for the following forms of approaches that I wanted to talk about. But this is essentially a very important one, repeating the systemics or the logics of design. And as designers, what we're interested in is we're interested in what happens in between. Not only, but in a big way, we're interested in what happens between things. So we don't look necessarily at elements, but we want to know what goes on between elements, because as designers, we're creating relationships, links, connections, bonds, actually creating assemblies, compositions, synergies. So systemic design is sort of key to everything that designers are doing or will be doing to work differently in the future. So following from that is the next branch, and it's incipient designing, the one that is just emerging, that I think is very important now to pay attention to, so that when we're asked to think differently, this is a different way of thinking, not necessarily a new way, not necessarily the best or true or any of that other sort of thing. It's just a different way of thinking that we should pay attention to and see if it works for us. So in this case, there are two branches, one wide designing and one deep designing. And as I promised, the one I wanted to look at and did look at was deep designing. So in order to introduce this idea of deep designing, I needed to go back and tell a personal story. When I was an architect student and a young architect, I became very infatuated with a design style called shaker design. And shaker designs, furniture, architecture, came from a religious order, started in England, but there were a lot of communities in mostly the northeastern part of the United States. And they had the design products they created for their own communities were absolutely, or are still, marvelous. And the craftsmanship and the quality of what they did, the aesthetics, were very attractive to architects. A lot of architects really, really fell in love with this particular style. But my sort of aha moment, overview experience, if you will, the emergence of a seed for a schema for deep designing came when I came across this quote of Sister Barker, who had said, I would like to be remembered as one who had pledged myself to the service of God and fulfilled that pledge as perfectly as I can, not as a piece of furniture. And that made me stop and think, my total focus and my colleagues, our focus was on the style, on the product of a certain kind of lifestyle. But how could you begin to appreciate what that represented at a deeper sense? So I started to look more closely at what deep shaker designing would be all about. And I created a kind of a draft approach, scheme to deep design that would be represented by these different measurements of life. So the one that I had focused on, my colleagues had focused on, was a kind of a standard of life. But it was representative of a way of life and a quality of life and a spirit of life. And that's what the sister was hoping she would be remembered for, were these deeper qualities, these deeper values in her life. So taking that insight, that draft, I created a schema for deep designing, and have been working and developing it over the years. And I know we misuse this iceberg model so much, but still it works somehow. So the schema, in this case, my schema is at 4 different levels. So the descriptive part, the part we see and experience, represents what the instant in time is, the ultimate particular, the particular. It's about appearances and experiences. The next level, which is explanation, is the cause of those particular appearances and experiences. And the next one is the because. So what was the agency behind the cause? Why was this? What direction were the designers going in? when they created what they did create. And then, of course, at the deepest level, the prime movers, the values, what I call underwriter, guarantors of design. What at the very deepest level, what is it that moves us to design things, to create things? So it appears that primarily, at least in my experience, our focus is on the action side of deep design, the upper level, the artifacts and instances, kind of deep diving at the shallow end of the pool. So when I've been invited to judge a design, or somebody asked me to critique a design, primarily what people are expecting you to look at is the description. It's true in architecture and all other sorts of graphic or design fields, is you look at what the appearance is, you look at what the experience was, and you're being asked to judge it just by what appears. So, as we know, there are a lot of different things that appear through design: trash, junk, stuff, things, different qualities. But we can't really critique it unless we understand what's deeper. What was the reason that these things came into existence in the way that they did? So, just to sort of test out my schema for myself, I started looking at the things that I had collected and that I was holding dear in my life and that I thought were good designs, and say, what would that look like if I put them in this schema and began to critique them. So I used to do a lot of ceramics when I was younger, and one of the things that I had learned and had really begun to appreciate was something called raku, or low fire ceramics. And what I discovered was that raku was used in the Japanese tea ceremony to create the utensils that would be used at a particular ceremony, tea ceremony. And so even though these cups, for instance, these teacups are collected, museums have them, private collectors have them, they're very expensive, they represent something much deeper, just as the sister had asked for her life to represent things at a much deeper level. The tea ceremony, it turns out, has very deep meanings and traditions. So I learned a lot about the value of raku and what it represented by finding out more about the tea ceremony. Same thing when I was working in Indonesia. Of course, I visited Bali, and I got a Balinese mask, as almost required to do, is collect the masks. Really liked it. Appreciated the aesthetic. I sort of understood that it was used in ceremonies and religious ceremonies primarily. So I looked at it again and found the much deeper value systems that this mask represented, what came into the appearances and experiences level of design. And visiting in India, when I did, I got to know a lot more about fabric design. That was very popular there. And so I did the same sort of thing, maybe not done well, but these are kind of just draft notions. How do I make sense of using my particular schema? How do I make sense of things that appear in the world as material designs? And so this is one way of doing that for me in fabric design. And of course, product design, the company formerly known as Apple. I had really, really liked Apple. I've used their products for years. I'm not so sure nowadays, but I had really appreciated them over the years. And Steve Jobs sort of caught for me what the quality of the design was, that people did take it primarily as veneer. So when people have asked me, well, we would like to be the same level of success in design as Apple, and so they're putting rounded corners on their aluminum cases, and it's like, that's not quite what it means to be good design at that level, and that there was this much deeper level that it's what Jobs called the soul of design, the fundamental soul of man-made creations. I had a very good friend, colleague. He was on my committee, my PhD committee. He started a program. He's one of the seeds, his ideas started the Seed for a Healthy Cities program in the United Nations, one of the largest programs around. And his seed, his key idea was that health is much more than doctors and hospitals, and that we needed to begin to design cities to be healthy. And it turned out that all these cities, north, south hemisphere, all around the globe, started creating what they thought were healthy cities based on this seed idea, but being manifested in entirely different ways. And there's a great city in Brazil. One of the people that sort of followed Landul was the mayor of Curitiba in Brazil, and recreated, rebuilt a city around some of those ideas, around systemic design ideas. And it's now a place for planners from all over to come and see how those principles really play out. And I was very fortunate when I had graduated from my undergraduate school. I went to Finland, and I wanted to study and find out more about Finnish design, again, which is, the appearance was something that I was very interested in. And I was lucky enough to be there in the late 60s, which was at the end of the golden age of design. And design had been used for Finland. Finland had been under Swedish or Russian rule for centuries, and they were becoming a nation. And they used design to define what that nation was, who they were as a people that were now free to form their own political systems and that. So again, I had collected, of course, Berkeley's glasses and whatnot and brought them back. And then I discovered, looking deeper and paying attention, that there were these deeper value systems that were in play, and actually the very sort of psyche of the Finnish people themselves. And then I even took the schema and I tried it against using my notes and sketches and that for a project that I had done years before to see how that played out using this schema. And it worked quite well. I mean, it captured what I was sort of doing intuitively. It captured it in kind of a structure. So to make deep designing actually instrumental, there are, I believe, deep designing leverage points. So first leverage point, the highest, is to look at the foundational inceptions, prime movers, and to pay attention to them, to change them, to adjust them, to become familiar with what they were. What do we want them to be? The next level of intervention is norms of inquiry, so that we look at our modes of inquiry for understanding the cause and because of things, the aspirations and explanations of why we bring things into existence that we do. And then the notion of very important pieces to check our research and our design science, and to make sure that the questions that are being asked and the approaches taken fit this deeper understanding, so that we're looking at facts, artifacts, theories, the particular general universal cause from a research perspective, and that it supports, that kind of inquiry supports our sort of search inquiry that we have. And finally, I guess the lowest effective leverage point is what are the desirable designs that we want to bring into existence. And I'm reminded here of what Akoff had said. I really liked what's become an aphorism for him. I really liked him saying that the righter we do the wrong thing, the wronger we get. So a lot of times we look at the things that are in existence, or we pay a lot of attention to refining the things that are in existence without sort of looking at the deeper strata and value systems that have brought it into play. I've sort of adjusted that, his saying, a bit to say that the more we go in the wrong direction, the further away we get from where we really want to be. And although it's not to be underestimated that good appearances, experiences, designed things that appear in the world are important, sustainable, all the rest, fair, equitable, all those things are important. But if it's not going in the right direction for the right reasons, for the right people at the right time, then they're not necessarily good designs and things that ought to be refined and continued and prototyped and that sort of thing. So the instances and particulars and ultimate particulars are things that we should pay attention to, but that's not the place that we're going to make the biggest difference. It's the place where we can be most successful at innovation, where we bring things into the world and people find them attractive and they find that they want to have them as part of their lives. But it's not at the level that we need to stay in order to make sure that we are creating or doing the right thing righter. So I would consider this an inception point. I mean, there were a lot of ideas in here that I've presented. There was only time to sort of look at what was in the foreground. I kept a lot of the background information visible so that we never lost sight of what was the context, what was the environment, but primarily just skimmed through and looked at the foreground of some of these ideas about how to actually think in a different way so that we can actually make a difference and move in a positive direction from where we are now and to regain or reaccess a sense of well-being. And I believe that a part of that well-being is not just the outcome, but it's actually the ability to engage in a search and find the things that we think are desirable, and then engage in a process of bringing those desirable things, those situations, experiences into reality and making them a part of our lives. So this is the end of the presentation, and we're open to questions and comments now. I invite people to contact me, stay in touch. We have a lot of people who are sort of working in these new areas, so there is a lot of new sort of different thinking, not so much new as different thinking and not right ways of thinking. It's just a different way of thinking. Maybe this is a better way of getting out of what we've done in the creation of the Anthropocene. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harold. I always miss the applause after the speeches. That's a feature that is missing, not working very well in Zoom, but thanks for a great and thoughtful lecture. We have a few questions, and while we start to answering those questions, I will read them out, but while we're doing this, you can still add a few questions to the chat. So there's one question from Manpreet. Thanks for a great framework to evaluate the design. Would love to understand your perspective on where do you think culture fits in this schema? On the surface or underlying cause? Is it description or inspiration, aspiration?
So I guess the question is, what is culture? And from this approach that I have, and for me, culture is at least two different kinds of design. One is that culture are the artifacts that we see in the world that represents a value system that people have used in the creation of the cultural artifacts. And the other form of culture is it's a design of a social system, and it's a design of a collective identity that people have. So it has the same, or can have the same levels of depth to it as the deep design artifacts. So like looking at the sister's furniture that represented her culture, then to look at those deeper levels and to see what is it that underlies that. And sometimes, when you go deeper, actually it can be rotten at the core, or it can be very beautiful and good and generative and that sort of thing. So, but anyway, that culture means those two different things, distinctions, and the way we use them in an everyday way.
Here's a question from Tom Majorana. I'd love to hear more about the notion of quantum inquiry.
So, use the term quantum inquiry, and it's linked with quantum seeing and quantum hearing. It's sort of what I do a lot when I'm making presentations. I do this for myself, is like quantum listening. What channel are you listening on when you're hearing somebody or watching a movie or reading a book? What channel are you open to? Are you looking for things you already know? Are you looking for things that challenge you? Are you looking for new information? So what you hear actually depends on which channel you're on. It's not absolute. So at the end, when somebody says, was that a good presentation? And I'm not asking for any special consideration, but somebody says, is that a good presentation? It sort of depends on what channel you were on when you were listening, whether or not it was a good presentation. So the quantum search, for instance, inquiry, is that where you start making the inquiry is not given. It's not predetermined. You determine where you're going to start. You determine the question you're going to ask, and you move from that position. So it's relative. And it's not like, the relative truth or something like that. It just means that it depends on where you choose to start, the question you choose. And it's tied to this notion that there are no real systems in the world. The systems that we deal with are the ones we choose to deal with. We choose what we're going to consider a system. And that's what we work with. And we don't actually find or stumble across real systems as such. They're all sort of relative to how we look at the world, how we've framed it, what we've named things around. According to some folks, the naming and framing of systems is one of the most powerful things that a designer does.
Interesting question from Peter Jones. If we applied the deep inquiry design approach to our own RSD community, how might we raise a better understanding of our values and approaches? How do we design who we are in practice as if we were shakers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Peter. And of course, I think it's through conversations and dialogue, shared conversations and dialogue. And a conversation, my understanding is that it's being in the same place with people and turning together. And dialogue is letting a thing be seen through words and conversation. So again, it's an indeterminate outcome. So it would be a search inquiry, but you have to be sort of in this collective conversation, a designerly conversation. So design inquiry is inquiry for action followed by action. So it's different from description and explanation. Somebody could go in and do a study of RSD and say, well, this is what it looks like, and this is how they operate. And that doesn't tell you then what it ought to be like or what you ought to design it like. You need this different way of looking at it.
What is your view? That is from Chagriti Pukan. What is your view on deep designing as a tool for social innovation? In a socio-political context, do you think policymaking by governments interrupts the natural flow of social and cultural evolution?
So, I would say that, the deep design doesn't prescribe any certain outcome, and policy and organization and all of that are the things that can be focused on as something to design. And I've done that with governments and organizations where policy or organizational structure, all that is a part of it. And whether or not it has values that are embedded in what appears in the way the organization functions, who it serves, how it serves, that sort of thing, all depends, again, on that first lowest level. So I would say that in social design, social organizations, any of that sort of thing, it's like getting to the highest leverage point and to find, there's a lot more to all of this. Of course, it's like finding out what's the shared common ground. How do we stand together and look in the same place and work together? So that's all in preparation for the actual design work itself. Things I have to say that's always skipped, or not always, often skipped in design processes, is getting people to look at where they stand. Is there common ground that they stand on? How do they become a cohort? How do they become a collective? Because design isn't the work of an individual, it's the design of a social system. So how do you work together as a team, as a cohort? How do you serve people as designers? It's like, one of my other insights came from somebody in San Francisco who said that when you fix people, you treat them as broken. When you help people, you treat them as helpless. When you just serve them, you treat them as equals. And they're, in the end, they're not indebted to you, that you've had this equal relationship. And so that sort of thing has been very fundamental to how design plays out for me. Is I don't start out to fix or help people, and I think design ought to be service by definition, needs to be service by definition.
We have still time for a few more questions. Here's one from Sharon Matthias. Are you suggesting that thinking differently as we approach our projects, especially using deep designing, gets us automatically to your original definition of well-being? Or does one need to start from a value intention of well-being?
Yeah, it's all about, and of course, none of this is automatic. Like any approach, any method, any mindset doesn't guarantee that what's going to have be an outcome is a good outcome. You still have to have skills, competencies, abilities, which is why education is so important, I think, nowadays for designers, is that the tools, the methods, all of that don't have good solutions guaranteed in their structure. It's up to the designers and the people they work with to be competent in the way that they bring things into existence that have high quality. And we're not guaranteed. We have things that don't work quite so well. But one of the things I tell people, students, is that the value of you as a designer is that not because you make good decisions. Computers make good decisions, better decisions than we do. What makes you valuable to people is you make good judgments consistently. And in judgment making is different from decision making. And in judgment making, there are no right or wrong answers. There are only consequences. And there are good or bad consequences. It's something that I learned from Horst Riddle. So your value to people is that you know you have the competency, the ability to make good judgments, good design judgments consistently.
Thank you so much. Here's one from Kat Charbonneau. Deep learning and curiosity implies a level of time and commitment to access this consciousness for self and others you bring along the discovery journey. Any advice on expediting this process on a multi-stakeholder level when so much disruption pulls us back to level 1 and 2? How do you sustain that collective consciousness?
Yeah. That's the challenge. So what I say is some of these things, it's part of the preparation for designing. And it ought to be starting right now so that you as educators, designers, practitioners start paying attention to your stance. What is the solid ground, your bottom turtle? What is it that you stand on and believe in and assert? And that's ongoing. So when you start a new project, you've already done a lot of that internal work. And I have a colleague, she's written a great book about the designer. Who is the designer? It's like, how do you help people pay attention then to who they are and what their cognitive frames are, what's their mindsets, what the frames are that they're looking at the world, what are the filters that they're using. And you can't do that necessarily when somebody asks you to do a project, but what you do, what I suggest, is you start forming design teams that work well together where some of that work is already done. So rather than just as an individual out there being brought in to do something, you can start to bring in a design team. You have networks of people who understand what it is. They've done some of the work, and then you can help stakeholders, stockholders, decision makers, clients, all the others begin to appreciate how they are thinking, and that becomes a part of the work. So in the beginning, for instance, it's a painful sort of thing in some cases, but when you're working with a client, rather than tell them you're going to collude with them and do whatever they say that they want you to do, and you don't even collaborate necessarily, because collaboration is good. It's a synergy. You can collaborate to get a car out of the ditch or something to pull the snow away. What you want to do is work for a conspiracy, and a conspiracy is a breathing together, so that you have people that begin to share at a deep level the kind of rhythm of the inquiries that you're trying to do, the introspection that you're trying to do. And I've had students over the years look at teams that they've worked on and why did those teams fail. And there's a little model schema. I could share another point. There's another, anyway, there's this one schema of forming, storming, norming, performing. Put that up against their experience in teams. When did you fail? Well, they usually failed when they did not go through one of those steps. Almost invariably, a client or somebody will want you to skip steps, not prepare for the whole process, so you don't become a full-fledged high-performance design team. You try to jump into the process as a group. And anyway, takes time and commitment. You have to push back. You don't have to collude with people and say, yeah, it is instantaneous. Yeah, it is just post-it notes. Yeah, it is just a workshop on the weekend. Yeah, you don't have to do any of that. You wouldn't do that as like a licensed architect. I've pushed back on clients a lot saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's illegal. No, I'm not going to do that. That's not a good way to work. And sometimes you have to fire a client and not work with them. You don't have to work with anybody, everybody. So anyway, work for a conspiracy, not a collusion. And that's it.
One last one. How do you know when to stop while digging for the prime movers in the schema? That's from Biswarup Data. How do you know when to stop?
When to stop? It's interesting. It's like Eric, I guess, first introduced me to this notion, and I've done it myself. I do it with folks. I think I'm answering the question. I'm not sure. But anyway, you can say, people begin to ask yourself, why did you do that? Well, why did you do that? And they keep coming, well, why did you do that? And you start moving down through those. Pretty soon you hit a place where, that's just who I am. That's what I believe. And they can't go lower. That's their bottom turtle. That's where they are. That's what they stand on. There's postulates that we have as designers, just like our scientists. We accept that without having any kind of proof or anything. That's true. We have assertions. We have beliefs. And all those are important. They're not biases. Those are important. They're important to have. If we don't have them, I think the psychologists say we're insane. So we have to have all those things in place, the cognitive frames, worldviews, all those things. Did that was I answering the wrong question?
I thank you very much, Harold. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. And a big applause for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back in India. And as I told him yesterday, actually, it's interesting because you can get jet lag in your own office, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to attend sessions. So you don't even miss jet lag when you do this.